Okay, item next is to the briefing discussion and possible action regarding the existing parkland dedication ordinance and proposed changes in the land development code revision. Randy, Scott, and Scott.
Good evening, everybody. How are y'all doing? Good. So I tried to make the rounds a little bit earlier. My name is Scott Grantham, Parks and Recreation Department. This is Randy Scott from the Parks and Recreation Department. I'm a principal planner. I've been with PARD for 6 months now. Prior to that, I was with Planning and Zoning and the Development Services Department before that. So I've been with the city for about 5 years. You might have seen my name in other contexts, but very happy to be here tonight to talk about parks and representing PARD. So the presentation this evening that I understand has been asked for is really twofold. On parkland dedication as it is done now, and also on the land development code, which I'm sure y'all have all been following. So I call this past, present, and future because we're really looking at the way we do things now, kind of where we are today, and then potentially where we may be tomorrow. And Randy's going to fill in and when I have gaps. So the parkland dedication ordinance, I'm really going to assume this is going to be a real primer here. So many of you already will know some of these things, but I really want to be thorough in this. It is an adopted part of the current land development code, and first in 1985, we have updated it twice, and most recently in 2016. So for the 2016 version, there was really a major effort to do outreach, to involve the community, to really get a lot of input in doing that, and that included developers. And ultimately, we came out with what we have today. So basically, the main premise of the LDC, or of the Parkland Dedication Ordinance, is that we have a certain level of service for parkland. So we have a certain population, and then we have a certain amount of parkland. And as more people move to Austin, as more babies are born, as our population grows, we have additional need for parkland. And so really the idea is that hopefully we'll try to maintain the same level of service, even though we know we're a growing city. So what triggers parkland dedication? It's really residential development. So we look at residential. We also look at hotel, motel, and in the future, we have been interested in looking at commercial development too, but we've been unable up till now to form really a rational nexus of saying that commercial would trigger parkland dedication. So basically, I do also want to recognize one other member of our team who's here, Robin Haymans, who's a landscape architect, and she is a very valuable member of the team who helps do the reviews. Tom Rowlandson is across the hall right now in the Planning Commission. So that pretty much, and then Justin Stewart. That's the whole team right there. So what does this apply to? We're really looking at site plans, subdivision, and building permits. Most of the things that come to us are either subdivision or site plan. So these are permit applications that come through the Development Services Department, and they're distributed to PARD. And we get these, and basically the main question in our minds is land or fee, because as I mentioned earlier, if it's a residential development, it's going to trigger the need for more parkland. And so that would either be in the form of land or fee. So to answer this question, we're looking at a few different things. The parkland deficient area. So that map that you see there, it may be a little bit tough to read, but it is, the yellow is park deficient area. And it is determined by the walking distance from a park. So the goal is to try to be able to walk to a park within a quarter mile in the urban core or a half mile outside of the urban core. So basically, this map we feel is a very good representation of that. It takes into account not only distance but also the roadways, so that it wouldn't be necessarily as a crow flies, rather it would be can you actually walk to it. Next, adjacency to existing parks. So basically, we're really looking at trying to create a park network, and to do that, you're sometimes going to need vital connections, so that if, for instance, there's a vacant lot and it's being developed and there's a park right on the other side of it, can we set aside an easement so that somebody could walk through there to the park? Critical connection. This could actually be a greenway that is that we're missing a piece of. So it'd be important to fill in the gaps when we're missing a piece, say on the Boggy Creek Greenway or Shoal Creek. And then Imagine Austin goals. So basically, this is the underpinning of the entire thing, and it includes the quarter mile and the half mile walk. So the idea is that explicit in Imagine Austin is the idea that all citizens should be able to walk to a park within a quarter mile or half mile. So we have equations that help us do this as well. So basically, this parkland level of service is determined by a factor that really looks at the amount of land per person. And so we're able to use this as new development comes along to say, okay, well, can we extend that further, and what would be the impact of that development in terms of acreage? So that would be for land, and then we've got one for fee as well, which looks really at the cost factor. So some of you have already guessed that, with these fees, what can they be used for? And the hope is that they can be used to acquire land. And so we do acquire land, and that parkland cost factor is really a historical look at how much has it cost us to acquire that land over time. So when we get land, this is showing you where we've gotten some land. The pink is are the parks that have been acquired or through or dedicated through this process, and so it's adding to the existing network. So you're seeing the green, which is City of Austin Parks. Let me see if I can read that really fine print there. And basically, it's, if you take all the colors together, the greens and then the pink, that's the dedicated land and the existing parks. So to date, since 1985, so over 1,700 acres of dedicated parkland through this process, and 38 acres of easements. So many of those easements function just like parks. They're just basically a passageway from one place to another, and some of them can look like a park. development incentives basically offsets the idea that somebody's going to have to dedicate land. So today, these live in special area plans like the East Riverside Corridor, the transit-oriented development districts, and a few others. Yeah, so the pink are the areas that have been dedicated through this process. So the impervious cover allowances basically means that for any particular area, it's going to have a certain, it could be like a 60%, 70%, 80% impervious cover, and parks are not going to need that. We may need 5%, we may need less, and so basically we can share the impervious cover among the, we can essentially transfer the allowance of impervious cover that we would have gotten to the rest of the parcel. Benefits of parkland adjacency. I think it's inherent that if you dedicate a park as part of your development, that you're going to get the benefit of that park for residents. If it's a mixed-use development, then the people who use the other parts of it, so retail customers, office, etc. So, how do we use the fees? The idea is that hopefully we can use them to buy land. So, and where? Really, the first hope is that we can buy land very close, because the idea is that if that development is generating those fees, then it may not be suitable to do land dedication on that parcel, or maybe it's too small, or maybe there's something that doesn't meet our criteria. But hopefully we can acquire land within a half mile. So we start with a half mile, and then we go out to 1 mile, and then ultimately 2 miles if nothing is available. It has to meet our standards. So, for instance, we don't take parks that are less than a 1/4 acre. We don't take parks that are on, if it's composed entirely of like a very, very steep slope, and it wouldn't be usable for any kind of programming or any kind of recreation. And then after 1 year, if we're unable to, then the money can be spent on park amenities. So the development fees, just to be clear, that this is kind of the other part of the fee. So there's a fee in lieu, but then the development fee is actually charged to either a development that has to dedicate land, or this is also charged to someone who's paying fee in lieu. So the way that it works is that if you're dedicating land, there's a number that's generated that's based on the number of people in your development. And if you're dedicating land, then you can take that number, let's say it's $100,000. You can take that number and you can use that money to build amenities on your park, and you get credit for all of those. So essentially that is not so much a fee as a credit system. And then if it's fee in lieu, then it's actually treated like an additional fee. So then that money can then be used similarly to the fee in lieu, but it's actually spent on programming in the nearest park, a metro park, and then on these various types of amenities. So that is the present. That is the past, and that brings us to the present. So the Land Development Code, it's something that I'm sure everybody is familiar with. We're really looking at tonight's discussion is going to be parkland dedication. And there's a particular section in the new code, in the proposed code, and it was in your backup, And that's what we're going to talk about. Some things that may come up, but it's really kind of through a park lens. I think that we're going to try to focus really on parkland dedication, and that section is 23.4b. So understanding that these topics are very much in the news right now. They're very much being discussed, but the hope is that we can really focus on parkland dedication. So, how did we get here? I wanted these to pop up one by one, but for some reason it didn't work like that. This is a timeline here. In May, the city manager wrote a memo that said it basically these are the priorities for the draft code, and he had sort of polled the council members, and that memo that he wrote in May solidified it and said that these are the priorities that needed to be taken into account. So in June, then there was a leadership and core team formed, and we began meeting. So I was part of that team. Randy has also been involved in this quite a bit. And then July through October, we've been in discussions with the leadership team and others. On October 4th, the draft was released. And then we're here at the Blue Dot. And then afterwards, some of you have been involved already, but all this month there have been open houses. There was a public testing where we looked at what the code, the code would look on specific parcels. Special called meetings. There's been just a lot of activity. And then December 5th is going to be the first reading at council. So basically the council direction, just wanted to provide a little more information here. I'm not going to read these, but these are two things from the city manager's memo. Let me go back one. The first one really highlights the importance of the activity centers and especially the activity corridors, and says that non-zoning regulations, and that would include parks, should be prioritized in a manner that allows for greater potential housing unit yields. So this has been a real focus. But then this piece is also very important. It's coming right after that. So the code should create alternative equivalent means to ensure the balance of needs while protecting environment and sustainability, landscaping, parkland, and tree preservation. Okay, so basically, while talking about these requirements for and this need for housing, the idea is that that should not be done to compromise environment, sustainability, and specifically parks. So, what's staying the same from the new code, from the old code to the new code? The short answer is there's not a whole lot of change. So I'll just walk through these briefly. Applicability is what does it apply to? Site plans and subdivisions. Times when we get to look at areas for development and for assessing parkland. The dedication formulas, the formulas that I already covered, that look at parkland level of service and parkland cost factor, those are the same. The urban core cap, many of you are familiar that we're limited to 15% of land that can be taken in the urban core. That's proposed to stay the same. The standards for parkland dedication, so like the types of land that we can accept, the size of a park, all these different things, all of that staying the same. Fees in lieu, and when a fee in lieu can be accepted, staying the same. The development fee staying the same. What's different? Parkland assessment, slightly different. Under today's code, in the parkland dedication operating procedures, which is a rule, you could say that it's code, but it's really officially a rule that exists today as what we call an early determination. And so what that is, I'm going to cover that in a second, but under the proposed code, it's actually in the code. The parkland dedication bonus is new, so I'm going to look at that too.
So if I could just add to what he said, I need you to know that what's staying the same is that's what staying the same in the proposed code that has been in all of the meetings, right? So that there's always an opportunity for there to be changes, but as it stands now, as it had been proposed by staff and as it's being presented in the community and the community is providing additional feedback, there may or may not be changes. I just wanted to make sure that if a code moves forward, if the land development code moves forward and looks different than this, that you would know why, right? So this is as is being presented by staff today. Well, the conglomerate of people who are considered
Right.
the folks who have helped develop the land development code.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So the new elements, parkland assessment, basically, and this is what we call today the early determination. At any point before an application comes in, an applicant, developer, can ask what will be the requirements for parkland dedication. The map that I showed at the beginning that had all the yellow in it, that is public, and that's part of the property profile tool. But we actually do recommend, and we try to promote this as much as possible, that people do this so that they will have more certainty as to what our requirements will be. Will it be land, fee, or a combination? And staff work with developers to identify the best area for parkland on or off-site. Basically, off-site dedication can happen within a quarter mile of the site.
So it's a good improvement.
Good. The dedication bonus. So basically, the idea is that it's a big ask to ask for land. And as important as it is to have parks, the idea is that when a developer is giving up land, then we don't want them to have additional constraints. And so the idea is that there are these metrics that can be calculated off the gross site area. One is floor to area ratio, and that's really the square footage of the building as it relates to the site. And then the other one is the number of units per acre. So basically, what this does is it says, let's take your whole site before you dedicate the parkland, and that can be the denominator, and you don't have to split off the parkland and then count a lesser area for those measurements. And it's basically a benefit to the developer. And lastly, the sharing of impervious cover is codified. So that means that I mentioned earlier that most parks are not going to need a lot of impervious cover. And so on a case-by-case basis, we can come in and say, well, we want 25%, and then you can have the rest. And the idea is that it's a transfer of impervious cover from the parkland to the rest of the site. So this has been a bit of a, for some of you this is not new information, but it's been kind of a walkthrough of what we do. It's kind of a high level, and I can answer a lot more questions. I do want to say that this staff feels like we are in a good position right now to say that we support this this draft of the LDC for the parkland dedication section. We support this section, and we are we recognize that there and that section is again 23-4B, parkland dedication, and basically just wanted to mention that this is written as an action item for the board. We're not going to say one way or another what action to take, but we do want to say that we're here to answer any questions that you might have. And Randy, do you have anything to add to that? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I have a few questions. Is mixed-use development included?
In our assessments, yes, to the extent that there is a residential component. So if it has if it has even one residential unit, we're going to look at that and we're going to determine whether that would be land or fees.
Okay, because I imagine developers in mixed use would look forward to the impervious cover share.
Definitely, I think all developers would, and it's a matter of the it's going to be a case by case basis, but there can be a transfer.
And then on the yellow map that you showed earlier, do you have that map with the pink overlay?
No, but I think we can easily get that.
Okay, because I think it is interesting to look at the park deficient areas and see where we have improved the situation with those pink dots. So I think that would be a good map to have. The other map that I think would be good is where we would like to buy land. And one of the questions around that is, would you accept land that had improvements on that? Because if you're only looking for open land in Austin, Texas, in those yellow areas, I'm sure they're very limited.
Thank you. The yellow on that map identifies pretty much target areas that we prioritize with some different criteria for parkland acquisition. We do buy land with improvements, and we usually scrape those down, demolish all improvements, and start anew.
And so we did pass a recent bond for parkland acquisition. Can you kind of fill us in how that kind of fits?
Yes, we recent bond, November 18, passed voters approved a bond for $45 million for parkland acquisition. We spent much of this last year prioritizing that yellow. We took that yellow and created a heat map, based that on population density, income, lower income, and children population. So high children population, population density, and lower income became areas that were hot on the map. We then zoomed in on those areas, prioritized land acquisitions in those hottest areas. Our goal is to eliminate the yellow on that map. That would be providing a park within a 1.5 mile of all residents in the city of Austin. Their goal would also be to close all the gaps along some of our greenways that we are missing. So Walnut Creek, for example, we have a northern Walnut Creek trail that was spoken to earlier here, specifically about Balcones District Park. There was a bond that was, actually a grant that was awarded in 1997 for that trail. Went from Balcones District Park to Walnut Creek Metro Park. Later on, Lloyd Doggett had some earmarked money to build Southern Walnut Creek Trail. That trail went from basically Walter E. Long down to Go Valley Park. There's a gap between 290 and I-35. We do not own all the land there, but the idea would be to connect Northern Walnut Creek Trail and Southern Walnut Creek Trail eventually along the creek corridor. So we are looking at parcels to try to close that gap. There's also the option of using MOCAN along that corridor. So,
And then, Randy, on the slide on how we got here, you can look at that. The dots, right. So the only public input is after the draft? There was no public input before the draft? Okay. Just wanted to highlight that. And then do developers get?
Hang on one second, board members. I think we all are aware of the efforts last year for the land development code, and there was a lot of public input and public stakeholder giving the city of Austin some real feedback as to what it was that they were looking for or the things they didn't appreciate in the previous efforts. And so I want to make sure that we're acknowledging that there has been an entire process in the previous year that gave the city of Austin substantial amount of feedback, which then was, incorporated into what is being brought forward. So to characterize it as having no feedback, I think is a little unfair. I just want to say I just think it's a little.
That's debatable.
I think that the problem is that we're not hearing about what's happening. There's a lot of trepidation. I have a note today from my neighborhood about their concerns.
I'd like to add on to what Kimberly was saying is that we are here to talk about 23-4B, which is parkland dedication ordinance. And the bones of this ordinance and what is in here and being proposed and brought to you in front of you, we spent 2 years of public engagement on. So I spent 14, 15, and some of 16 on public engagement. Board Member Palma was heavily involved with that engagement. So there was quite a bit of public engagement on what is being proposed in front of you and what is staying intact in front of you.
And granted, I just wish we would have had a little more time to review it and provide input before the draft. We could have supported it more, perhaps. But thank you for a very good presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott.
I have a question. Maybe it's just me that I don't understand. With this fee in lieu, I'm concerned because I'm thinking about a lot of the projects that are going to be implemented over by Oracle along Riverside, East Riverside, and there's going to be a new domain, I understand. I'm a little nervous about all this because of the decreasing parts of land. And when I see fee in lieu, and I think about if they're able to pay, and I think about something that we saw that then it didn't come back up to us, and I don't know what happened to it, but the Old Statesman area, and there's going to be a new development there, and I saw paving over track and some other things, and so I'm very concerned watching all the things go up, and I can name lots of things on the corner of Academy and South Congress. I do not see new parkland going in where they're making huge growing things. And so I'm concerned that offering this fee in lieu, and there is no other land available in that area besides what is going to be built on. So I'm concerned that this fee in lieu is an easy way for developers to say, here's my money, and, go ahead, buy a park. Good luck with that, right? That's my concern with that fee in lieu piece of it.
That is a concern. We do utilize the fee in lieu often to buy land. We use it to match with our bond dollars. So we can also extend those bond dollars from $45 million into almost doubling that with using parkland dedication funding. and we can buy it where we want. Are very particular. We usually, since 1985, we have required land be dedicated in only 6% of the cases that we've reviewed. Of that 6%, and of all the land that we've taken over the 1,700 acres, about 80% of that is in the floodplain. So those are usually, we try not to impact the development when we take land, not to impact units, so we acquire land that is undevelopable. It either has heritage trees or water quality areas. So parkland dedication is not meant to, by any means, be the only way to acquire land. We utilize bond dollars, also approved by citizens, to acquire land. It is to supplement and also be the have development pay for a not when additional residents move here, not have us in a free fall for our parks per acre that we have currently in the city of Austin. So while it's not meant to keep us at a flat line where we are currently gauged, we will still slightly decline. We were rapidly declining before we changed the ordinance in 2016. So we always recognize that bond dollars are going to be the way we acquire district parks, the way we acquire future metro parks. And those are our large acreage parks. We're going to end up, through parkland dedication, we're going to get pocket parks, a lot of greenways, and maybe a few neighborhood parks.
So you're actually saying that for us, you think it's more beneficial to get the money to buy a bigger parkland? I'm not
No,
understanding exactly where
I
you're
didn't
going
mean
with
to
this.
put that. Just the type of parks that we're going to get. It's not going to keep us at, parkland dedication is not designed to keep us at 24 acres per thousand or 20 acres per thousand in population. It's designed to keep us at 9.4 acres per thousand. So as a thousand,
I'm not picturing all that.
not picturing. So the city of Austin has a goal to have 24 acres per thousand population. Parkland dedication, the requirement in the formula that went through earlier was based on 9.4 acres per thousand population. So as 1,000 residents move to the city of Austin, they have to dedicate 9.4 acres or pay a fee in lieu of for us to buy 9.4 acres. So that keeps us at that goal level, and we utilize bond dollars to stay at 24 acres per thousand.
But I guess that my concern is not, maybe we're talking past each other, but my concern is when you're taking land, for example, in East Austin, building this new domain, and you're taking space, and they're not giving that space back, they're giving you a fee, and those neighbors may lose that space if you don't find another space there to buy for parkland. That's my concern.
Thank you for bringing up 4700 Riverside. That case has had a lot of attention, and I hope that it will continue to have a lot of attention.
So wait. We need to make sure that we are staying on the agenda, right? So we're not posted to talk about 4700 Riverside or the domain, but we can certainly talk about parkland dedication and the concept of that. I just want to make sure that we're
Ask for a report on that or something.
They will be dedicating parkland.
Yes, and that is because that they are in the East Riverside corridor. So there are certain areas of town, the East Riverside corridor, the transit-oriented development districts, where parkland must be dedicated in order to get a density bonus. So.
Okay, board members, I just want to remind us, we are
moving
not
back there.
posted to
I'm gonna
talk
comment-
about
I'm gonna
that
comment-
particular.
I'm
Right,
gonna-
let's just focus on this.
No, I was just trying to use that
think
as an
it-
example,
No,
I'm sorry.
I'm going to come at it another way.
Where's the map?
So, since I've been on this board, we've had several cases come before us where we've been asked by development that set aside park, and we've been asked whether or not what they proposed to be a park is an appropriate park. And some of that's parkland dedication, because they've dedicated in their development. Camelback is a good example of where I forget how many acres, but 20 some odd acres or more, is a dedicated park. But in the process of the planning commission approving and zoning approving that whole development, we were asked whether or not what they had proposed to be a park was a park. And the same thing happened to the Grove. Same where we had
That's superiority.
we had to take a vote as to whether or not we thought what was being proposed was appropriate Superior Park or a park, and I think that's where the Parkland Dedication Fund comes into play.
That was part of the calculation.
Right, it's part of the calculation. That's why I think it's important to
Thank you, Board
understand
Member. That's
how we sometimes get involved in the whole approving process, but only about parks. Is that right? I mean,
Thank
that's
you, Board
kind of my
Member. Yes,
understanding.
those are PUDs, Planned Unit Developments,
Whatever,
that come
however you want to call
forward.
it.
It's a zoning case, and in order to be approved, they often look to be superior in certain sections of the code, and Parkland is being one of those. And we bring those forward to the board in hopes that the board will either find that superior or not find it superior. Most recently, we brought Austin Green in front of the board. This map is really a detailed map. It's a lot more detailed from this scale than you would realize. But those are walking distance. We've identified walking distances to parks, access points to parks, how you can get into the park, and mapped out a 1/4 mile by walking and a 1/2 mile by walking outside the urban core. That yellow area would be areas where we would try to work with the developer to require land to be dedicated. If that helps guide some of the questions that you were having about where east of I-35 or where we would require that land be dedicated.
I have a few questions about this. Sorry, are you finished? I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. So one of the things, going back, some things I want to reiterate. And this is the chart of the parkland per 1,000 residents per acres, and it continues to decrease. And so when we revised the ordinance in, I think, late 2015, January 2016, it was to address that and to bring as much money in as possible, and having to do so in a collaborative process, which was extraordinarily difficult for everybody involved. But it worked, and quite frankly, that collaborative process in 2017 during the Texas legislature really prevented parkland dedication ordinance from being challenged and ripped by the state. There was a bill that was filed, and to remove our ability to do parkland dedication ordinances throughout the state. And because we were able to address, in my opinion, misinformation that was presented by another stakeholder, and we talked about the compromise, and that's what actually protected it. And so the committee just let it go. So this was a lot of work. There's a lot of folks who would like to see on both sides. I'm going to try to defend this as much as possible, but there's definitely folks who think it's I still hear about it, that's an overreach. That's too much. At the time, people wanted to wait till the Land Development Code to come up to address this, and we just couldn't afford it. And I think it's paid dividends over and over that we're able to slow down the bleeding that we've been facing on that ratio. One other thing is on the maps. There's some couple of tools. I just sent it to April. She sent it along to y'all. And this is going to be the various maps you can access parkland dedication. You can see where the fees that have been collected and expended are. There's a number of different tools, including Trust for Public Land, which uses our data set, working with the Parks Department, and then, of course, going through the property search and permitting, where you can actually click on the filter that will let you see the parkland dedication. Not as nicely as it's presented here, mind you, but it's still there. So hopefully that will be helpful and gives a little background.
Thank you so much. I've been really curious to learn more about this topic. And first of all, I need to state that I would like to abstain from any action that we take on this item because there's a chance that my employer may be taking a stance on parkland dedication as part of the land development code. So I don't want to weigh in on it here in a vote, but I really appreciate the presentation, and I do have some questions about this for you all. So if we look at the third slide, this lander fee slide right here, I'm interested in what is the density number look like? I guess, well, is that density of what? Because it looks like dwelling units are already in there. So what does that look like when it's a real equation?
Oh, the equation below, the
Yeah.
land acres?
Yeah.
Sure. So basically, if we're solving for land, we take the 9.4 times the number of dwelling units for a development. Let's say it's 300. And then density is actually something that is calculated to be either low, medium, or high. And it's basically the idea of how many people are in a dwelling unit. So we have 1.7 as a low, 2.2 as a medium, or 2.8 as a high. And you know where this comes from?
And that's the number of people per unit?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
And so people who have said, I guess one observation I would make is that if you get to the 2.8 number, keep in mind this is something that's going to generate land acreage, and then ultimately it can be used to do fees as well. It's actually set fairly low because if you take a couple with a child, that's 3 people. And so it's actually even the greatest number there is lower than that. So it's 2.8.
So basically what you're saying is in a real equation, the density number would either be 1.7, 2.2, or 2.8.
Correct.
Okay. Great. So I think we've only had one parkland dedication case come before the board since I've been on the board, I think. And I was a little confused about some of the other variables that were getting thrown around in that discussion. So they were talking about the possibility of adding trails to their site, and my understanding was that they wanted the trails to count to like be weighted heavier than they were being weighted, and that then they had land in the floodplain and that wasn't weighted as heavily. It seemed like there were a lot more variables floating around in that discussion about that parkland than we're getting shown here. So this seems very clean and simple, but then when we were hearing about that case, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much to think about here, and there's all these different aspects of this potential parkland are being weighted, based on these different kinds of attributed values. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because it seems like a whole other world, what we've just seen here.
Yeah, it can get confusing. Thank you. So, so not all land is equal to all other land, right?
Mm-hmm.
So think of it maybe probably the simplest form is an easement on top of land, and the easement only allows you to do certain things. So there's land that a developer might want to dedicate as parkland, but we're limited on what we can do there. Can you do full development? Do you have all rights? Then that would be 100%.
Mm-hmm.
If it has an easement that says you can only build a trail here, you can't build a playscape, maybe that's 50% credit rather than 100% credit. So an acre would only count as half an acre. So there's different variables, and there's floodplain, 100-year floodplain, you only get 50% credit. We're limited to what we can do on that land, so we credit that 50%. So 1 acre would count as half an acre.
Okay.
So, and that's really more detailed and outlined for the people administering the Parkland Dedication Ordinance and our Parkland Dedication operating procedures.
Mm-hmm. So in a case like that where you have maybe a bunch of land that counts for only half of the value of the actual land in this equation, can you combine it with fee and lieu, or
Yes,
just
you
have to
can.
be one or the other? Okay.
99.9% of all parkland dedications are, when they dedicate land, is a combination of land and fee and lieu of. Very rarely is it all land.
And then I believe I recall in the when we were looking at mitigation calculations for the health clinic that was going to be placed near the Dove Springs Rec Center, I remember board member DePalma brought up about the fact that some of the lot sizes didn't quite look correct, and so that mistake was drawn to our attention, which is great. But what that made me curious about was, does the lot size of the surrounding homes have an impact on parkland dedication, or is that just in this mitigation calculations?
I think the answer is no, but
It does. Number of units per acre of development is how you come up with the density in that formula for land dedication. So, single family, and I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I bet we can find them in here or in the land development code, but it's,
I have them.
I hate to give you the wrong numbers, but
Which number are you looking
density
for?
is kind of
So-
like condo development. That's at 2.2 acres.
Well,
So
in particular, what I remember, and I'm sorry that I'm bringing this up without all of this backup for us to look at, because it was a bunch of equations that I didn't understand. But Rich brought up that some of the lot sizes didn't look right, but that was for mitigation, so that's different from. Okay.
it is different, but
Okay.
you did ask the question about does the lot size determine? So not more than 6 units per acre is low density, so that gives you the 2.8 acres. 6 units to 12 units per acre gives you the 2.2 calculation, and more than 12 units per acre gives you the 1.7 density people per unit.
And then board member Rinaldi, so you're correct as far as how that is, how's that used within the calculation? It's within the pricing of acquisition of parkland over a 5-year time period. It's within that specific area, so that's how they come up with the cost. So it's not applicable. In the big challenge with it's always been it doesn't represent market cost. So it is a calculation. If they were going, and so if there was ever a challenge and say we're opening up this, which I certainly hope we don't, but say the city does, then it's what I would be advocating for is going to a market-based cost assessment.
Oh, yeah, I'd like to hear any other questions too. Thank you, though.
A question. How much did you take in for fees in lieu of land last year? $13 million?
We appropriated $13 million in October.
So $13 million. And then how much land did you acquire last year?
I don't know if I have that number off the top of my head. I can get that number for you
Okay.
to be exact.
Thank you.
Mr. Scott, could you do the comparison as far as 2015, what we brought in?
Prior to 2016, we averaged somewhere between $3 to $4 million appropriation in parkland dedication fees a year. There's a chart. So in 2012-13, we appropriated 2.1. 13-14, 4 point, I think that says 5. And 14-15, we appropriated 3.9. 15-16, we appropriated 3.7. And it started slowly increasing to, this year is $13 million.
So you collected $13 million last year, and then you appropriated a much smaller number. So that means the money that you spent from
No, we appropriated $13 million.
13, okay.
And we'll be spending that over the coming years.
Okay.
On land acquisition and park development.
Okay, sorry, I must have heard that wrong.
So, go ahead. Can I? Sorry, I'm having feedback too. Follow up on that question. So 13 million is what we took in for fee in lieu of, correct? Okay. How much of that can be attributed to the dramatic increase in development permits, as opposed to that we're actually taking in more? Like percentage, what are we taking in? Is our ratio the same? The money we take in for the acres, or are we taking in more money?
It
Get
was
my
both.
question?
There has been an increase in development, in
Yeah.
residential development, and it was a very busy year in review. And there's also the fees have increased since approval of 2016 Parkland Dedication Ordinance.
Okay, great. Thank you. And
So
then
the answer is combination. of
it's a
both.
combination.
Yes.
Okay, good. And then that was just a follow-up, but I did have a question. You were talking about the impervious cover sharing. Is there any requirement that that impervious cover sharing stay in the same watershed?
Yes, it would, the impervious cover sharing is when a development, a residential development dedicates land on site. So that dedication, it would, the parcel that's dedicated would be sharing back to the development. So it would be in the same watershed, unless there was a dividing line right in the middle, I guess.
Right.
That's
So that's for the parkland dedication, but it does not apply to the fee in lieu of, where we would acquire park, if they paid a fee in lieu of, and we could acquire parkland in the general vicinity that's in a different watershed? Is that something that?
There would be no,
Okay.
if we take fee in lieu of, there would be no impervious cover.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Real quick. So just want to give you some information, board member, regarding the old parkland dedication. Say it was 1,000 units. Underneath the old parkland calculation, it would be 8.5 acres of parkland for 1,000 units, straight out, period. Underneath the new dedication, for low density, it goes to 20, well, actually for high density, it goes to 17.68 acres. Medium density, 22.88. Low density, 29.12, if I have that correct, Mr. Scott. So it's significant, even on the lowest amount, you're over doubling the amount of parkland. I was looking for the numbers as far as the actual fees for on the fee in lieu. Unfortunately, I can't recall it, so I can't give you a comparison, but it's not even close. So, thank you.
Any more questions? So,
Question. Thank you. When we were talking about this, the parkland assessment, so the second to last slide, so that's when you work with someone who's developing a site to say, okay, this is where we would either have you dedicate your parkland on site, or this is where we would want you to dedicate it off-site, or where we would want the fee in lieu to go? Like, how does the off-site thing work there?
Sure. Off-site probably wouldn't come up at this point, but it's possible that it could. Usually how this looks is that if it's a sizable enough site, if, let's say there's a nice stand of trees, of heritage trees that are located like right along a street, we might say, well, that's an ideal location for a park. And based on your number of units and the size of your site, we would say we would require 1.5 acres. Another version of it could be that there's enough for a small park, like a 0.25 acre park, and then because the rest of the land is not suitable, then the rest would be fee and lieu. So that would be kind of an option B. Option C would be maybe it's not in a parkland deficient area, so it would be only fee. Now, if during these discussions, we might say, well, it's 1.5 acres, and they might say, well, there's no way we can possibly do that, and then we say, well, okay. There is also the option of off-site dedication. So we mentioned that to them at that point, and on a few occasions they have identified something that was within a quarter mile that they would prefer to dedicate. Now that still has to meet our standards in terms of size, accessibility, the rest.
And so they would then go purchase that piece of land off-site and dedicate it?
That would be an option if we identified it at this stage.
Just to add just a little bit here, and really the underlying purpose and how the early determination or parkland assessment came about when that was in our 2 years of public input with the development community. Certainty was something that was sought. They wanted certainty when they were doing their feasibility study. So when they were looking at buying a piece of land and they're looking at their zoning, they're looking to see how much of it's in the floodplain, if there's heritage trees, they wanted something that told them if they were have to dedicate land or they could pay a fee in lieu of. So we created this early determination process. Free service, developer can come in, they provide us a rough estimate of number of units and where the development is, and we will give them a letter that is good for 1 year in writing that says land is required or fee in lieu of will satisfy your parkland dedication requirements, or a combination. So that's really the purpose of the early determination, is really to develop certainty before the developer has bought the land and when they're looking at buying the land.
And so how far along are they in figuring out how much information do they need to have about what they want to put on the site in order for you guys to accurately assess what you would require in terms of parkland? Is it just number of units? Is it?
Most of the time what we are given is a conceptual plan, number of units, and the location and the size of the lot. A lot of the information we can pull from GIS ourselves, so we can look at contours and the layout of the land, if there's, if it provides a connection to a park. So often through parkland dedication, some of the biggest and the most critical pieces that we're getting are just 15-foot wide strips on the side yard that connects 1,000 residential units to an existing park. That's critical. Without that, then these residents are driving a mile to get to the parking lot of that park. So those are the kinds of things that we're...
Okay. Thank you so much.
Any more questions? So, real quickly, because I know we're taking up a lot of time, could you just tell us what kind of impact you think this ordinance has had on parks, and with the being able to provide green spaces and parks for our citizenry, and how important the tool is, and then also just briefly just how it has impacted development as it has come as rapidly as it has too.
I can speak to how critical the parkland dedication ordinance is, if you would like me to. This map pretty much tells the story. So the parks that are pink were acquired through parkland dedication. The parks that were green were either donated or acquired through bond. It's quite a large chunk of our parkland system that is acquired through parkland dedication. So to me, that map is pretty telling of how much land and how many neighborhood parks, those parks are there because of parkland dedication. So the impact that it has, it enables us to deliver, expand existing park facilities to account for additional population. It allows us to match bond dollars or go out and buy parkland to account for additional population. Without a parkland dedication ordinance, that burden is put on the existing residents of the city of Austin to meet that demand, new demand that's generated by growth. It's not by any means a full new development. It's not meeting the max that they could meet. That by law, the parkland case law, U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that we could have our parkland dedication ordinance at, or the fee in lieu of could be a lot higher. But it is allowing the citizens of Austin that live here not to fully subsidize new development.
Thank you. Okay, any more questions? Well, I would like to move that we urge the city council to keep in, and I've actually written up a resolution. I know I've.
Yeah, you passed it, and didn't have any edits.
Yeah,
I think it was
I actually, because Board Member De Palma had worked a lot on this issue in the past, and he's kind of an expert, as he is on many things. So he did take a look at it. And I know that Board Member Rinaldi, you said are you going to recuse yourself? Is that what you said? Okay. Okay. Recruits. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that we just had that clear, because I know you said something about your employer. I didn't know if that was how that worked. But you're just not
Board
sure.
member, if you would turn on your mic. That's okay.
Yes. Yeah, so my employer might be weighing in on the parkland dedication aspects of the land development code at some point in this process, and I don't know whether or not that will happen, but just in the interest of keeping that separate from this process here, I'd like to abstain.
Sure, of course. Well, I mean, this body, we are only focused on parks. I know that the land development code obviously covers a lot, but that's not really our purview. And I think that, I feel that just with the growth of Austin and wanting to ensure that future generations have parks, that people can walk to parks, that people can have the green spaces that I think are so important, I think we really just want to reinforce. And I think we should just send a message to the council saying we really believe in this ordinance. This has been so effective and so impactful. And so I wanted to just, instead of just saying that, as you can see, I wrote down a couple of things because I thought we just needed to put a pretty clear message. And so if you just want to, and I guess, do you guys want to see it over there?
Once the board decides how they want to act on that, we'll just need a copy of the final item.
Okay.
So, Madam Chair, do you want? I mean, I know you're letting everybody a chance to read it, and then do you want to restate it, or would you like me to restate it with an emotion? Whatever you would like to do.
I'll be happy to do it. I thought you could second. Is that okay?
Yeah.
That would be great. Thank you. So, does anybody have any discussion about this resolution?
You want to read it out loud?
Yes, I'll read it out loud.
Thank you.
Whereas the Parkland Dedication Ordinance was approved in 1985 and amended in 2016 after 2 years of developer and environmentalist input as a means for helping implement the Imagine Austin plan, which highlights the need for more parks and open spaces spread equitably across our city. And whereas the Parkland Dedication Ordinance is important for honoring the city's commitment to equity for all its citizens to have access to parks and open space throughout the city, and aligns with the mayor's pledge to meet the Trust for Public Lands goal to provide a 10-minute walk to a park for all citizens by 2050. And whereas the Parkland Dedication Ordinance has positively impacted parkland assets in park deficient areas across the city, improving people's health and lives. And whereas with climate change and rising temperatures, and as Austin grows and becomes more dense, the ordinance serves as an important tool to help develop urban parks, which serve a crucial role in helping to mitigate flooding, capture carbon, and provide community cooling space for our citizenry. And whereas since the 1985 inception of the ordinance, its impact on development has been minimal, as in only 6% of cases has parkland actually been dedicated, as opposed to developers paying a fee in lieu, with approximately 80% of the land dedicated located in the floodplain. Simultaneously, under the ordinance, over 1,700 acres of new parkland was added. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Parks and Recreation Board strongly urges the City Council to uphold and keep the parkland dedication ordinance in its current version. Does anybody have any discussion?
I second the motion.
Thank you. Any discussion?
Dawn, can you please state the motion before we get a second?
Oh, okay. Therefore, I thought I just did.
Well, you actually gave her.
The
Well,
okay.
I'll let-
I'm going to move that we adopt this resolution to support the parkland dedication ordinance. Does that work? Good.
And then I second it.
And Board Member
I'll
DePalma
second
second.
officially. Yeah.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None? And one abstention. Thank you. It passes with one abstention. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah. Okay, and our poor people at the Silker Zephyr, still here, and I've lost my agenda. Okay.